Morning, everyone, and welcome to the last of your HSMA Phase 1 training sessions. Just first of all, congratulations for being here. Congratulations for making it through and getting to the point where you are where you are. You've learned so much, I hope, and I hope you can really look back at what you've achieved over the last 6 months and be really proud of yourselves. Today, we are going to spend a little bit of time going through Quarto and xlsxwriter. It's really about today getting your outputs from all this wonderful code that you can now create into another format that people can use. Make your outputs look really good so that people will sit up and take notice, I hope. Couple of little housekeeping bits before we kick off. Well, the only main one to say actually is the hackathon is going ahead next week. That will be next Tuesday, normal session times. It is optional, but do take a look at the registered hackathon projects at this point. And if you would like to take part, sign up. You can still propose another project. That's also absolutely fine, but take a look at what is being proposed there and make sure that you do come along and make the most of that if it sounds like something that would be enjoyable for you to do so. I think it will be a really good day, and we will be getting people to present at the end of the day as well. And I think we should see some really cool outputs. Only other thing to note about today is we will spend the morning and probably a bit of the chunk of time after lunch looking at Quarto and reproducible outputs. But also today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about your projects and what things look like after this phase, because this really is in a lot of ways just the beginning of your HSMA journey. That the project phase is kicking off effectively next week, and we really want to make sure that you've got everything you need from us to be able to start and work on your projects. And we will also spend a little bit of time going over the areas that we couldn't fit into the course. There's still so much out there that I wish we could have squeezed in, but we just can't make the training any longer than we already do. And I'm sure you're very much at capacity for learning new concepts at this point. But I would just like to make sure that we give you time, give you a bit of an understanding of what else is out there, because sometimes just knowing the tool exists, knowing the technique exists is the key, and this will hopefully serve you well on your journey as you continue to learn more and more code and techniques from here on in. So let's get on to Quarto and reproducible reporting. So I hope at this point that you all love code, or at the very least you tolerate code and appreciate it for its benefits. And it is wonderful. Code is fantastic because it really allows us to generalize and automate processes. You're able to make things that are auditable. You're able to actually look at this process from start to end. Unlike an Excel spreadsheet, you're able to see everything that's going into that final output and share that with other people so they can see under the hood too, without having to click around and dig into what's happening in this cell, what's happening in this macro, when does that get triggered, etc. Also allows you to separate the data from the process, which allows wider reuse and adaptation. It's very difficult to share that Excel spreadsheet potentially if it's really tied in with your exact processes. Code is a little bit better at allowing you to separate those two things out and make your code available to everyone else, and also make use of everyone else's code. And the government, and more recently, I'd say as well, the NHS have really heavily leaned into what they have termed RAP, reproducible analytical pipelines. Now, this in a lot of ways sounds a little bit more scary than it is, but in a nutshell, RAP is just minimizing manual steps through automation in some way, shape, or form. Not necessarily getting rid of all of them, but the end goal is at the very highest level of RAP to have no manual steps whatsoever. But in some way, RAP involves minimizing those manual steps. Crucial to this is the use of open source languages, R or Python effectively. This is great because it allows everyone to use them, your code, and it reduces the use of license fees. Peer reviewing is also a key part of RAP. You are now all able to review each other's code. You speak the language. You can look at everyone else's code and understand where to improve it, and to verify that it's doing what it should be doing. And other people will be able to do that for your code too. Version control software, which we talked about a few weeks ago, is also a crucial part of RAP. It's important for improving that auditability, understanding how things have changed, who changed them, why they changed. And it's also vital for making sure that if everything goes pear-shaped, you can get back to a working state or any state at all. Publishing the code externally. Now, as well as just there being a general sense that actually publishing code is good, there is a move towards the idea that public code created with people who are paid from the public purse should be a public asset. It should, unless there is a really good business critical or IG reason for the code to not be published, that is out there in policy papers saying this should be the standard. Everything should be shared that you guys are creating. Now, your organizations aren't necessarily at that stage, but it's really good to start getting away from the fear of, is my code good enough, and just start getting it out there. It is scary and it is a barrier, but it's better to get your code out there sooner in the process and people can start feeding in. And most of the time, to be honest, people don't. People are busy, people have their own lives, but the sooner you get stuff out there, the sooner you're going to find other people who maybe are working on the same things, who maybe are interested in collaborating, and the value you get from that is just huge. Finally, documenting the code in situ through comments, markdown files, anything, just to make sure that, unlike that spreadsheet where all the documentation is stored separately, or your process that you do every month, where actually it's in a Word document and that's stored somewhere separate and it's a real pain and it's not kind of joined up with the actual process. Instead, code allows you to document everything you're doing in place through comments and markdown files, and you can actually make sure that that keeps up with the code as it changes. Now, the NHS has published huge amounts of information about why reproducible analytical pipelines are good, what the different levels of reproducible analytical pipelines are. I'm just going to say RAP because otherwise we'll be here 3 times as long. And also how to do RAP. They have teams dedicated to helping other teams do RAP well, and they have huge amounts of documentation about this. So do take a look at that. This link that I've got here is a good starting point to get there. So like I say, you're in a great position to start producing work following these principles. You can use open source languages and version control. You are able to start reviewing each other's code. But what are your outputs going to look like? We've done a little bit of saving data to CSVs or saving the outputs of plots, but what happens when you start getting to more complex spreadsheets? Or what happens if you want to automate a Word document? Or actually, let's take it even further and create something that you couldn't create without code, something better than the status quo. Let's create a wonderful HTML report with all of these interactive maps embedded right inside it. Let's embed our interactive plots. Let's embed, the tables, the data, etc. Now, the tool we're going to talk about today, Quarto, allows you to do all of that. So Quarto allows us to interweave text with code and code outputs to generate complex reports, really nice, polished looking reports. And these can be exported as a self-contained scrollable HTML document. You could also export it as an HTML dashboard, a PDF, a Word document, PowerPoint slide. And the great thing about this compared to Streamlit is that you don't necessarily need a server. You can enhance them further by having a server, but 99% of the time, I would say that you will be doing these documents without needing a server. This removes the question of hosting. And you can still get a lot of the benefits. You can't get that full interactivity. This isn't necessarily a solution for creating an interactive front end for a discrete event simulation or something like that. But actually, if you need to be outputting, graphs, maps, etc., this is potentially a really powerful solution for that. Now, xlsxwriter is a different package entirely, but this allows us to do all our calculations in code potentially, and then start building complex spreadsheets that include native Excel formulas, native Excel charts for maximum end user interactivity. Now, this kind of, in a lot of ways, I know we've spent a lot of time going, no Microsoft, no proprietary software, etc., but we do recognize that it's so important to meet our organizations where they're at, meet them in the middle, show them that actually, okay, this is what's possible. Now we can start leading you towards the next step, the Quarto, the Streamlit, and so on and so forth. Being able to put the output, say, of predictions from a machine learning model into the kind of spreadsheets that people are using day in, day out really might help them start on that journey. Now, before we go any further, I'd just like to find out everyone's current level of Quarto experience, our Markdown experience as well. That will become a little bit clearer why I'm interested in that later on, although if you're an experienced user of either of those, you might already understand why. So I'm just going to pop that link in the chat as well, but if you could just quickly respond to the Menti, I'll just give you a minute or two to do that, and then we will check back in and we'll see where everyone. Right, so we've got a good number of responses in. Please do keep responding to that as you come on in. For those people who have just joined, I will pop in the link again. Just to clarify, yeah, people saying when I'm saying beginner, intermediate, advanced, what sort of things do you have in mind? So beginner, I'd say, you know, you sort of maybe made a couple of our Markdown or Quarto documents. You sort of fundamentally understand the basics of what it can do. Intermediate, you've used it a lot. Maybe you haven't started leaning into the more advanced features of it. But you've used it a fair bit. Advanced, I say you're starting to do you know, quite fancy things with it, or you're doing an awful lot of automation of your reporting via our Markdown and Quarto, that sort of thing. But don't worry too much about that. It's just to give me a bit of a flavour of where people would consider yourselves at with these technologies. So the vast majority of you, just quickly bring this over here, the vast majority have used neither before. Quite a lot of you have used our Markdown, which is really fantastic to see, and a good number of you have used both. I'm hoping I'll still be able to teach you some new tricks today, but for those of you who have used neither, I really hope that you will get something out of today and see a great way to create new documents. For those of you who've used our Markdown before, we've got a pretty good spread of beginner, intermediate, advanced. Quarto, similar, quite a few beginners, quite a few intermediate, and a couple of advanced. So for those of you who are more advanced as well, if you've got tips and techniques as we go through the day, please do share them either in Slack or in Zoom. Slack's a little bit more persistent, so that might be a good place to share them. But really, really welcome people's input on this. I think this is a bit unique compared to some of our other topics, because we have more of you who've used this before, and it's sort of, this was something we sort of anticipated with this area, but it's so crucial that we cover it. So right, onwards and upwards. So Quarto. Now, let's just quickly load up a very simple Quarto report to give you a bit of a sense of what this might look like. Like, this is the most basic level of Quarto report that you might be creating, but what we have here is a HTML report that allows you to scroll through and embed things like plots. Now here we don't have an interactive plot, we just have a static one, but we can also use various interactive plots as we've got here. For example, you can start to do things like change the length of time that is included. You can have tables, you can have math. That's probably not something you'll want very often, but you can start to interweave code. You can even leave the code there for people to see if you want, or you can hide it away entirely. You don't even have to have it as an expandable thing like this. But what you are starting to get is a nice report where you are in control of the narrative. You can include any text as you want. You can include inline code, so we could actually have the result of a calculation just in the middle of a sentence. You wouldn't know it was code created. It looks like the rest of the text. And we get these nice auto-generated tables of contents, that sort of thing. Really powerful format. Now we can also create things like PDFs, which give us a lot more control over, again, the final output. What exactly does that look like? And it gives us that nice some people will find that they don't want it in an HTML report. They will need the option sometimes for a PDF, a kind of static document format. Same with Word as well. You can export these into Word, and most of the time this is just the simple matter of changing a handful of parameters. Dashboards are another really nice use of this. Now, they don't necessarily have the same level of interactivity as a dashboard that you're creating through Power BI or something like that. But again, you do get this sort of intelligent resizable dashboards where they respond to the size of the user input. You have these multiple tabs. You can start to, again, demonstrate and include the outputs of your code in a way that will allow people to explore what they want to explore. A couple more examples, this should say slides. So you can also use Quarto to create really nice looking slides. You can do this as a PowerPoint export. If you just need your standard good old PowerPoint slides, relatively basic PowerPoint slides, but it's definitely something you can do to move away from that having to do copy and pasting out of graphs of data, etc. But you can also create these slightly nicer HTML slides if that's something that would be suitable for your use case. And you will see a lot of these, to be honest, at conferences. Very popular way of creating your slides, because again, it's all version controlled, code based behind the scenes. Now, if you want to follow along in the next steps, again, you're completely welcome to do so, like with the Streamlit sessions, but also if you'd rather just watch, that's absolutely fine. But what I would say before you do anything else, hopefully if you've done the setup steps mentioned in the instructions, you've already done this, but I would recommend that you head to the extensions panel in VS Code and make sure you have installed the Quarto extension. If you don't do this, you won't get the lovely Quarto preview button and everything just won't work quite as planned for the day. But Quarto, just as a reminder, where your extensions will be stored, this is over here. Let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger for you. Over here on the left-hand side of your screen, you have these little couple of blocks. Click into extensions. I already have Quarto installed, but if I were to type Quarto, it would come up. It's had several 100,000 installs, I believe, 145,000 installs, and you'll just have an install button here or here, like you do already for these other extensions. So just make sure you've got Quarto extension installed. Give it a moment to sort of filter through. So I'm going to move now to doing a little bit of live coding, and also I will try and keep the slides up on the side just so you can sort of keep track of where we are within the slides, but I will have to make these a little bit smaller. So let's just do that a second, get rid of the film strip, get rid of all these extra bits and pop this over on the far side. Now, today I'm going to be working in our lovely online CodeSpaces environment. Now, for those of you who are unable to get Quarto working on your own machines, either your IT department didn't install it, or you just have some sort of issues throughout the day that prevent you from using this, head over to the Quarto and Reproducible Reporting repository, click on Use this template, and choose Open in a CodeSpace. Now, it'll take a few minutes for it to sort of get started. It needs to spin up a virtual machine in the background, but once it's done this will give you the opportunity to work with a Quarto, with a full version of VS Code in the cloud. You'll get all of the code space, all of the code and exercise details over here on the left, and you will get the terminal and everything else. The Quarto extension is already installed in here by default, or it should be. It seems to be thinking about this for me, but hopefully it will. Yeah, there we go. So Quarto extension already installed, as well as a couple of other key extensions. So it should just work. Famous last words. So Quarto uses a special file extension called .qmd. Unlike our Python files .py, so after installing the Quarto extension, we can use File, New File, and what we'll get is, in addition to these options like Python and Jupyter, we'll get Quarto documents as an option. So what I get here is a nice little file that I can work with, and I'm going to save this. Now this will look a little bit different if you're working on Windows, but you can see that where I'm saving, I am getting this option to, I'm getting the .qmd extension on it by default. And I'm just going to call this my first report. So notice that when you save this document, like I say, it's come up with the QMD format. And all this starts out with is a blank page containing this title block. We call this a YAML title block, and it always starts and ends with these 3 hashes. Anything after this is outside of your title block. Anything within it is in your title block. The only things you want within your title block are special key value pairs like this. Outside of your title block is where you put everything else. So let's just first change our title to something a little bit more meaningful. So, I'm going to put hello HSMA here, and I'm going to put in a little bit of text as well. So this is first Quarto report. And notice, unlike when we were doing Streamlit, I'm not having to do any commands like stwrite, anything like that. I'm just typing in my text exactly as I would in a normal document. Now, up at the top right here, because I'm in a Quarto document and because I've got my Quarto extension installed, I'm going to preview. And what we get up at the top right, it's just thinking about it. Fantastic. I don't quite know why that's not working, so I'm going to open it up in a new page instead. That's always worked before, isn't that wonderful? But what we get here is, hello HSMA, this is my first Quarto report. We have a nice little output. Now I'm going to head back to my page. I'm going to close down that preview for now. And actually what I forgot to do in advance, and what you will need to do if you're not working on the extension on VS, on code spaces, is set up your interpreter, choose your interpreter. So I'll just quickly open up my normal VS Code for you here. So if you are working in VS Code on your local machine, I'll just zoom up a little bit here, you will need to select the correct environment in advance. What does that look like doing? Well, we go terminal. Sorry, we don't do that. Control-Shift-P to bring up this option, and we choose Select Interpreter. Now, this is just like going down to the bottom right and selecting your environment when you're in a Python file. It just means we don't have to be in a Python file to do it. But what I'm going to do is choose HSMA Reproducible Reporting. Now, that will hopefully be one of the ones available in your drop-down list if you have set up the environment in advance. So just as a reminder, Control-Shift-B, Select Interpreter, HSMA Reproducible Reporting. And that just means when I run my Quarto file from my from here, so let's just go test.qmd, and when I click preview, what we get is this little terminal pop up at the bottom, and you can see that it's got the HSMA Reproducible Reporting environment selected. And this is what it will hopefully look like for you. You will get your Quarto document appear in the other half of your screen. Now, I can't use that for the demonstrations today because at some point my Quarto has become a little bit corrupted, and unfortunately it just doesn't quite work as planned on my machine. So Quarto on this document instead is better on this code space. So, as I say, we've previewed our Quarto document, and it will either open up in this terminal on the right-hand side if your code space or document is behaving itself. And if it doesn't work, we can just click on this nice little icon here to open in browser, and it will open up like this instead. Now, if I go to my oh, Stuart, yes, sorry. If it doesn't come up with Select Interpreter for you when you start typing in, if it doesn't come up, start typing in Select Interpreter. Just quickly demonstrate that. So Control-Shift-P, start typing in, and you can filter down to the different options available. You want Python Select Interpreter. So if I look over here on the left-hand side of my screen, what we have is our Quarto document. Oh, I'm not sure why it's not working if you haven't, if you're working on, just as a reminder, if you're working on code spaces, you don't need to do this. Oh, Stuart, that's now working. Fantastic. Okay, so hopefully that will work for everyone who needs to select their interpreter. So over here, what you'll see is in my files now, the files that I've got created in my Explorer, this additional file has appeared, this HTML file. I didn't create that. Quarto created that for me when I previewed the document. Now, if I were to open this up in, open this up in a, just double click on it from within the Explorer, it would open up in my default browser. This doesn't work quite so well, unfortunately, on code spaces. I'm not able to preview this in the same way, but effectively it is what comes up here. This is what you are getting. This is an HTML file. But Quarto creates that for you, and this is what you would send to people. This is what you would distribute to other people when you are using your report. Now, we can make it a little bit better further down the line. I'll talk about that later. For now, if we were to send this in its raw format, it would be missing a few of the key parts to actually make it work properly. But we can fix that with one nice command later. Now, let's for now just talk a little bit about how to do simple things in Quarto. So you remember in Streamlit, we talked a lot about creating different headers, etc. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to go, this is a top header. I'm going to leave some text in there. And I'm also going to create some lower level headers. So what we're using here is called Markdown syntax. Now you can look up on the internet just a standard Markdown cheat sheet. Pretty much everything from a standard Markdown cheat sheet will work. But headers are just defined by the number of hashes you put before them. You need a space after those hashes, otherwise it gets a little bit confused. But in this case, 2 headers, this is going to be second level header. And I can go all the way down. This is a third level header, and so on and so forth. I'm going to preview this again. Open this up in the output. And what we get here is this top level header, biggest size of header. We then get a second level header, and we get a third level header. Now that will be really handy later on because these will be what generates that auto-created table of contents for us. Now we can also use some other nice tricks from Quarto, from Markdown, sorry. We can bold text by surrounding it with asterisks. We can italic text by surrounding it with a single asterisk. So two asterisks makes it bold, single one makes it italic. If I were to preview this again now, and open up my preview in my case, you will see that we have this bold text and this italic text in our output report. Now, it's worth noting as well that every time I'm changing something, even if I'm saving it, I'm still clicking render again. I'm still clicking the preview button. Sometimes you might find that just refreshing it is enough. I don't find that that is always consistent. I find pressing the preview again is the best way to do this. If you are finding that it says Quarto is not found, please install the Quarto CLI before rendering documents. That either means that Quarto just isn't installed on your machine. It's not like a standard package. It does need an install from your IT department, or from, if you're installing it on your own computer, there are some instructions on how to do this attached to the repository. However, if you are using, if you're on an IT managed computer, it will probably need them to install it for you, and I'd recommend using code spaces instead. The other possibility is that when it was installed, Quarto didn't get linked up with the rest of the system. The system doesn't really know what Quarto is or where it is. That'll just be an install issue. Again, I'd recommend you use code spaces today if that is the case. Now, as well, if you're finding that you press preview and it doesn't render, the other possibility is that something is blocked on your machine. And again, I'd recommend code spaces if that is the case. Hopefully you will be able to do what I'm doing and load it in that way, either having the preview appear within the Quarto window or opening it in a separate page. Now, this is, again, one of the ones where Quarto is a bit of an issue compared to something like R Markdown, but it is worth getting it installed because it does bring so much power that we're going to kind of dive into the further we get through this session. Now, let's also look at a couple of the other nice Markdown things you can do. You can do lists. So bulleted lists are really nice. So this is some text for my list. I'm going to go list item 1. What I'm doing here is a hyphen at the beginning of my line. Again, remember, you need to make sure there's a space here. This is a second item in my list. I don't know why it's trying to autocomplete that. I can indent. This is just tab, just like you'd normally indent code. This is an indented bullet point, and so on and so forth. So if I preview this now, we will be able to see what this creates. Open in browser. And we get our nice list item 1, list item 2, and an indented bullet point. We can do the same with numbered lists. Nice, neat little trick so that you don't have to change all of your numbers. If you change the numbering part way through, if you want to add another item in the middle of it, you can go item 1, item 2, item 1, item 2, item 3, and so on and so forth. You can see I've just put 1 and a dot after it each time. If I preview this now, what you will get is, drum roll please, there we go, item 1, item 2, item 3. And actually you can see this time I didn't close this window, I just clicked preview again and it updated, and it's nicely worked out the right numbers to put in, so it makes it nice and quick and efficient. Also important to note, as I said, that you need this blank line before your list begins. If you don't do this, I'm going to preview, and what you find is it messes up. It hasn't made our proper list here. It's given us list item 1, list item 2, list item 3, all in the same line of text. So just make sure you've always got this new line first. And then it will work like this. Now, links and images are a nice, fantastically easy thing to do as well. This is still standard Markdown syntax, so it will appear in your Markdown cheat sheets. Now, let's say I want to link to the GitHub repository or session 8a. So in square brackets, I'm going to put the text I want to appear. And in normal brackets, with no space afterwards, I'm going to copy in whatever link I want to include. If I save that now and preview, we'll just wait for that to filter through. You can see that we've now got a nice repository link, a nice hyperlink that the user can click on, and it's not just the unformatted link, it's whatever text we want to display. Images, very similar. It's the same formatting, except with an exclamation mark beforehand. So I'm going to do exclamation mark, square brackets, curly brackets. Now I don't have to put any text here if I don't want to. I'm just going to put penguins because that's what I'm going to display, and that will come up as a caption. I'm then going to link to either a URL image or to a web image, a URL image or a local image. In this case, I know that in the code along folder, I have an image that I could link to. I open my, I'm not going to open quotes. You don't need quotation marks. I'm going to do code along / and you can see it's nicely auto-completing here to a couple of image files I could include. I'm going to choose one of the penguin image files, save, preview. And what we get is this nice image file loading in, simple as that. So it's just getting used to that Markdown syntax that you will use again and again throughout. I'm just going to trim this over because we don't need it. So nice Markdown syntax that we use again and again, and all of this is referenced in the slides. Like I say, you could also link to a URL of an image that doesn't have to be a local image that's stored on your computer. You can link to something on Wikipedia, something you've got stored on GitHub, elsewhere, that sort of thing. Now we can also enhance the display of the images. You can see that here the image is quite big, it's taking up quite a lot of space. I could make that a little bit smaller by adding in some curly braces after my image. And I'm going to do width equals, I'm just going to make this 50, width of 50. In my image now, you can see it's come through really nice and tiny. Now, just to address a couple of the questions that are coming through. So one of the questions that's come through is, sorry, what just is Markdown? That's a fair question. So Markdown is effectively just a way of formatting text in, just using text that adds in additional formatting. So, for example, this is Markdown, this hyphen here, this hash here at the start of the line is a little bit of Markdown syntax that will get recognized when you choose this preview button as something that should be converted into some actual formatted text. So in this case, it recognizes that we want to turn this into this nice header. Again, these asterisks get recognized as just a little bit of a hint to the renderer that actually this isn't just plain old text. It's just used to format. It's formatted text, and it just means that rather than having, like in a Word document, the button that you click to say bold or italic, you can just write it all in one place. You can just use these couple of little shortcuts in your text, and all of it will get turned into nicely formatted text at the other end. Now, anything else there? I'm afraid, so I will open up a room in the exercise for people who are having issues connecting to the code space and that sort of thing, but it may be that we just are unable to fix that today. This is just unfortunately a really tricky thing to get working on everyone's computers just because of IT restrictions, a bit like we had with Streamlit. This extra software that then has to connect to additional things to open up additional windows. It's really hard to know in advance what ports are going to get blocked by different IT systems, etc. Code spaces should work, but unfortunately it seems that code spaces isn't working for everyone. So we'll see what we can fix about that, but it may be that we are just a bit limited today, unfortunately. So let's move on to one of the really nice things about Quarto, the thing that really makes it powerful, and that is code. So I'm going to make another header here, and I'm going to go, let's add some code. Now, every time we want to add some code, you can always think of this as adding a cell in a duplicate notebook. We're going to do 3 backticks. Now, backticks, these are not, they're not apostrophes, they are different. So I've got 3 apostrophes here, I've got 3 backticks here. Backticks for me are off to the left of the 1 key on my keyboard. That's true of both the keyboards I've got in front of me right now. Yours may not be in the same place, but just that would be where I would start looking, off to the left of the 1 key on the top line of your keyboard. If anyone else has got somewhere else, do maybe pop in the chat. It may help people find where it is on their computer. But that backtick is crucial for being able to create these code cells. We then specify the language. Now, some of you may use R, but for what we've been teaching on the course, this will always be Python. And we just put that in some curly braces. I'm going to put 3 more over here. So these backticks, the backticks at the start and the backticks at the end, delineate our code cell. Everything within this will be interpreted as code. So I can run anything I would usually run. I'm going to start by importing pandas in our normal way, import pandas as PD. I'm going to do penguins df equals PD read CSV, and inside this code along is the penguins data frame. So I just need code along /penguins df.csv. Now this is just code like any code that we have written so far. We've got 2 nice little things here. You can see that when I typed in this Python and these backticks, this got recognized as an executable code cell. Now for now, if I just do penguins df here, that will just mean that penguins df is the last thing that gets run in this cell, and it will just preview it, or it will just show, it will just print the whole thing. If I execute this code in the code cell, it opens up our little interactive code window, which we've used throughout the course. Now, this is just a really nice way to check that your code is working before you actually do anything else, basically. So here it's imported pandas as PD. It hasn't actually fully output everything here because that's not how it works in this. Oh, no, here we are. It just took a while. So what you can see is our code has imported pandas as PD, and it's printed out the data frame. Now, if I preview this in Quarto instead, so I've just click my preview button again, we now have the output of our code right there in our Quarto document. So we can display anything we want. We can display static plots. We could display interactive plots. I'm just going to do an interactive one for now. So I'm going to, let's make a new code cell actually, because the really other cool thing about this is it remembers, effectively, it remembers what you have done in previous code cells, and it can access the variables from them. They run throughout the whole thing. So I'm going to do this time import plotly.express as px, and I'm going to do px dot, I'm going to do a scatter plot, and I'm going to do data frame, sorry, I called it penguins data frame, didn't I? I'm passing in what my data frame is. You can see, just like in normal Python cells, I'm getting all of this autocomplete. It's trying to help me out, which is really handy. It's like coding as per normal. You're just able to add in all of this additional text and headers to split up your code. So I could put some text between here and this cell actually. So this is just some filler. There we go. So let's do this next bit. So I need to specify my x-axis, bill length in millimeters, my y-axis, let's do bill depth in millimeters, and just for a little bit of color, let's add in color by species. I'm going to preview this, and let's head back to our document, and what we get is this nice interactive plot just through a couple of lines of code. So I'm going to zoom in here. You can see I can zoom, I can hover to get the tooltips, I can auto scale, I get all of these standard plotly commands within it. I can download it as a PNG, opens up and allows me to save it, and so on and so forth. So we get this nice little base level of interactivity in our plots. And if you're an R user, you can use R cells too. You can use R and Python within the same document. You can even start to pass variables back and forth between R and Python, and it will intelligently try to convert them and use them. You know, it will take a Python data frame, a pandas data frame, and turn it into a R tibble or something like that. This won't work with the environment we've got installed. You also need to get R installed on your machine. It won't work on the code space we have set up today. But it is absolutely something you can do, and it can be a really powerful way to be able to get the best of both worlds. Now, as I say, if you're from an R background, this is all going to just feel very familiar. Why move away from R Markdown into Quarto? They feel almost the same. They're kind of doing the same thing. Quarto is just a bit of an evolution of R Markdown that is designed to be more language agnostic. It is designed to allow you to work with different languages all at once. And it also incorporates all these extra bits that sprung off from R Markdown back into the core package. So rather than having to download Bookdown, rather than having to download Shringen, rather than downloading Flex Dashboard, all as separate packages, all keeping them up to date, Quarto just brings it all into one place and really leans into that language support as well. You can use Python within R Markdown, but Quarto is just designed from the ground up to not be kind of tied into the R ecosystem. You don't need R installed, for example, to use Quarto. Now, in our code, in our report at the moment, you will have noticed that our code is visible. Now, this is great for some examples, but a lot of the time, if you're actually sending this report out to people who aren't code focused, you are going to want to get rid of that code and hide it away. Now, all we have to do for that is to set a code, a code cell option. Now, at the start of the code cell, directly after our 3 backticks and our language selection, we do hyphen and a pipe. Now, for me, again, hash. There we go. I'll copy this into the chat as well. If you can't find the pipe on your keyboard, for me, again, it's off to the bottom left next to my Z key, and both the keyboards I have in front of me might be different on Mac. But what I do is hash pipe, and then I can do echo false. Now, there's a huge number of different options we can set here, but the one you will probably end up using the most often is echo. Echo just means, do you want to display the code or not? By default, it's true in the document. You can set it to false, and then when I preview this, I'm just going to copy this into both of the cells for now for the sake of demonstration. So I've just copied and pasted that. If I preview this again, it will load up and you'll see that the code has disappeared. The code is now nicely hidden away. And you can start to chain multiple things together. So we get some others that, for example, you can hide warnings. So I could go warning false. And if there was a warning associated with the package that printed out every time I tried to do something, that would just make sure the warning didn't actually get displayed in the document, that sort of thing. Use those kind of options with caution, but they are very useful. And you could just add more and more things to this. Another one that's worth mentioning actually is label. So I can give each code cell a label. And I'm going to call this one plot, and I'm going to call this one data import. Now, if I head down to my terminal and re-preview this, so I'm just going to show my changes. If I scroll back through, what you can see is now where it will tell me that it's executing the report, and it will tell me what code cells it's running where. Now, that can be really handy when you start to debug. If I just get rid of those labels again and rerun. So remember when we ran it this first time with the labels in, we got told that it was running cell 1 data import, cell 2 plot. This time it just tells us that it's run cell 1 and cell 2 if we don't have the label. That is just worth noting. Labels are entirely optional, but as your Quarto documents get longer and more complex, this can really help you to understand where it's getting stuck, where the errors are happening. Especially if you've got a lot of very similar cells doing similar things. You might be running a function with different sets of data in multiple places, and it can be really hard to keep track of where it's breaking. Now, maybe I don't want to set echo in every single cell. I don't want to have to put that in every single cell across my 50 Quarto cells in my document. That gets a little bit inefficient. Now, this is where we can start adding things to our header. So we've gone back up to the top here, our document header. There's an awful lot of different things you can set in your document header, and you will spend most of your time looking those up, trying to remember what they are. It's not expected that you will just automatically know and remember the syntax for these. So I'm going to do execute, and then I'm going to indent, and I'm going to do echo false. So this is just like we had in our individual cells, echo false. This falls under the header of a series of options called the execution options. That's why it's in like this, execute, echo false. Don't worry too much about the details of it. The main thing to know and remember is this little code snippet is handy if you don't want your code showing in any of your cells. Just copy and paste that. You can use that without having to worry too much about what it means. And you can see when I hover over, different sorts of different bits of this as well. The header, it gives us some information about the different options available. So we can set this to true, we can set it to false. Different options will have multiple different available settings. Just to kind of add to Dom's question here, can you name cells like in R Markdown? I find this useful when running cells. Good question. I was just about to say I think that is the labeling, but I think it might be slightly different. So if you can pop a link to what that looks like in R Markdown, that would be really helpful. So yeah, okay, Claire is saying that is just the labels effectively. So yeah, just give your cell a label that is effectively naming it so you can keep track of what that cell is doing, and you can name it whatever you want. So we're getting towards the end of this section before I set you off to go and have a bit of a play around with Quarto. Next thing to note is code folding. So we can also, instead of having our code completely hidden, we can make it so it's something that the user can open and close up as you want to. I'll add a slide in on the labels as well, because I didn't put that in. I know a few people have missed this, but I'll add that in. I'll do another demo of labels in a second. So format, this time you can see by default, our document comes up saying format HTML. If we want to set additional HTML options, we just need to move HTML onto its own line, put another colon, and then we can start passing in more and more options to it, just like you can see in the example here. This time I'm going to set code fold true. I'm going to preview. And now inside our app, you can see we get this nice little code button that allows us to expand and hide the code. Now, this can be really handy if you've got a bit of a mixed audience, people who might want to understand what's going on behind the scenes, other analysts, and also for people who probably don't want to see that. So it just makes sure that your code is there, but not visible by default. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about inline code. So let's have a look at this. Inline code is really nice because it allows you to start weaving in text and code together. So let's say I defined in a code cell a variable. My number is 10. I can then do whatever I want with this variable right in the text. So I can do my number multiplied by 50 is, this time we just use a single backtick. We still provide the language, and then we do whatever little bit of code we want. We can think of this a little bit like an F string. So my number times 50, and we end with another backtick. You can see this time it's recognized that that is what our code should look like. It's recognized that that is a little chunk of code. I'm going to preview again. And you can see that it's done the calculation right there in the code and just given me the output. It hasn't previewed what the actual code is. It's hidden it in this nice little, oh no, that was our code cell from before. So yeah, it's just done the code calculation right there in the text and given us the output. Now that can be really handy. We could take this further. We could maybe calculate, the average weight of one of these penguins. Let's say the average weight of a penguin is Python penguins df. Let's say body mass G, and I'm just going to calculate the mean. Don't worry, you're not expected to know how to do that off the top of your head, but just, again, remember you can start doing things here like the average weight of a penguin is 4201. So really simply, you can start pulling in variables from throughout your code, anything that you've done, anything that you want to use, and pop it straight in one of these inline boxes, these inline codes cells, and make use of it. Now, if I go back up to my penguins data frame, remember we were just displaying this data frame and it's not really very nice. It's, it's just given as a preview. We're missing half of the cells. It's not formatted all that nicely, etc. It gives us this little thing about the number of rows and columns, which isn't very user-friendly. Let's just quickly make use of a really nice package called iTables. Now, from iTables, I'm going to import show. I'm going to preview this. I'm going to actually make sure that I use the function. That would really help. So what we've got here, I've imported a function called show from a package called iTables. That will be available in part of this environment. And then we can wrap our penguins data frame or any data frame that we've used inside show. When we do this, what we get, it takes a little while to load, but then we get a properly interactive data frame. We can sort, we can move through different levels of it, we can search. So let's say I just want to search for all the finstrap penguins. You can see it's filtered the data frame. We can even, with just a couple of extra commands, add buttons to download the filtered data for our end users. So this is really, really handy. Again, remember, we are not having to spin up a server to do any of this, to provide any of this interactivity. This is all self-contained. You don't need servers, you don't need hosting. You can just send out these documents as they are. I'm not going to go into Great Tables right now, but there is another package called Great Tables, which is a really nice one if you want a static table that looks really polished. It adds loads of options for formatting your tables in a way that will look great. You can add themes to them, you can change what the column names display as, and so on and so forth. Really powerful package that it's worth knowing about, but I don't want to overload you right now. But if you're interested, there are some examples in the slides, and I definitely recommend taking a look at the documentation. Final couple of things to go through here. I want to talk to you about callouts. So if you remember, in Streamlit, we had like ST info, ST warning, that sort of thing, where we were kind of creating some sort of highlighted section. We wanted to bring attention to some text. In Quarto, this is kind of similar. Again, we've got a similar way of doing that. This time, we are going to create them as what we call callouts. So we do 3 colons. You may be noticing a pattern here. Quarto really likes its 3s. So 3 colons, open curly brace, and we do dot callout. And you can see it's giving me the different callout options that I could insert. I'm going to do tip, and I'm going to put, here is my undo tip. And again, I'm going to close it with 3 colons. So that's always the pattern. You start with 3 of something, you end with 3 of something. Anything outside of that will not be included in the code block, the call out block, etc. So for example, if I put here is the text, and I'm going to preview this now, scroll down to the bottom, you can see we get this nice little tip box. Inside was my handy tip. And outside, remember we went back out after these 3 colons, we're back to normal text. Now, you've got different ways of adjusting exactly how those callouts display. You can make it so that your callout does have, is a bit more visible, for example. So we have this standard call out with a little icon. We have a minimal call out, which is really just a border with a bit of color to indicate that it's something different. Or we have a simple call out, which doesn't have this separate header, but still has an icon. So those are just options you can set yourself if you are interested. Now you can include absolutely anything in callouts. You can include code. You can include plots. You can include anything at all. You can also make these cells collapsible, these callouts collapsible. To do that, you just pass in collapse equals true, preview, And now you can see when I click on this call out, it opens and closes. So this can be a really nice way, again, to include additional information in your call out. And that was just collapse equals true within our curly braces. I know we're throwing an awful lot of different commands at you here, so don't panic. It's just another one of those things where you need to know a lot of commands at the beginning to sort of get going with it, but you will just use them more and more, and you will get comfortable with what Quarto can do for you. I think I'm going to stop there rather than going on to columns and tabs. But if you're a bit more confident with Quarto in the exercise, have a look at the slides on tabs, have a look at the slides on columns. This is a really handy way to lay out your Quarto reports in a more complex manner. You can have columns next to each other. You can set sizes of the columns. You can you can have columns and then rows of text, etc. The other thing is tabs. Tabs are super handy because it allows you, again, to sort of click through different parts of the report. You can have tabs for different, you could have a tab for each penguin species in this data set, for example, so that people can click through rather than having to do loads of scrolling. They can have tabs instead where they click onto the relevant bit of information that they want to look at. Final one I do want to tell you about before we crack on with the exercise is just a few options in our header. Now, first one that you'll probably want to use very often is embed resources. I click through. Now, if we look over at my exercise, my files over here on the left, my first report files. Now, where did that come from? That is a folder that is created when I preview my report. And it comes with loads of extra things in there, loads of icons, some HTML stuff. Now, if I were to just send my report out to someone now without sending that folder as well, it would just be broken. It wouldn't work properly. However, if I set in our header, embed resources, true, and re-preview this, what we will see is actually, hopefully, that folder has entirely disappeared now, because everything is instead inside our HTML file. It is now truly self-contained. It can now truly be sent off by itself, and it will work. Now, occasionally embed resources in more complex documents will break things. That is unfortunate. If you are embedding other websites within your Quarto document, which you can do, for example, that will unfortunately not work with embedded resources. But for the vast majority of documents, embed resources works absolutely fine. Finally, I spoke a lot about that wonderful auto-generated table of contents. So let's set table of contents, TOC, to true. And now I go back up to the top of my document, you will see that we have this nice table of contents on the right-hand side of the screen that has just appeared and been auto-generated. Now, there's loads of additional settings that you can do so that it will display second level headers, third level headers. What level of header do you want it to display? Do you want those headers displayed by default, or do you want it collapsed until you click into the sort of top level of that section? So there's all sorts of additional things. Again, just take a look at the documentation. There is so much you can do in Quarto. I am just scratching the surface of some of the key settings that I use day in, day out when working with Quarto documents. And the final thing is, if I were to just change this now to my output being format PDF, and I were to click preview, I would get a PDF document instead. Now, that sort of works, but bear in mind we've got a load of interactive content in this example. We've got an interactive table, we've got an interactive plot. However, if you just have a static table and a static plot, then your PDF output will just work. You will get a PDF document instead. You can change that to Word. You can change that to different kinds of PowerPoint presentations. You can also, worth noting as well, you can set up special options within Quarto so that actually you will only execute a particular code cell if it's in a Word format, and you will execute a different code cell if it's in an HTML format. You can have multiple outputs at once from the same Quarto document. So actually I could set this to output as both a PDF and an HTML, and all the code would be the same. All the code would be stored within the same Quarto document. The output would just look slightly different. So, time for an exercise. We run a little bit over. The first thing I would recommend is a nice 15. We'll break until 10:50. So you get a bit of a chance to have a break, although I will check if there's any other questions first. And then we will work on an exercise for about 40 minutes. What we're going to have a look at is, we'll first just try and get you to display a Quarto document, and just have a look through the code of a standard Quarto document like I've got here. Just see what you think, if you can understand what it's doing, talk through it in your PSG. Then I have provided you with a Python file, and this is going to feel quite familiar at this point. It's that des from last week that you turned into a Streamlit app. Now this time, instead of turning it into a Streamlit app, I want you to turn it into a Quarto document. I want you to have a think about how you could best lay this out. I want you to convert it into a Quarto document. There's code comments in there. Maybe you could just turn that into normal text. You can split it up using headers. You could try hiding the code chunks. Think about how you might want this to look to an end user. And if you complete this, you can start trying some layout features. Go back and have a look at those slides that I didn't go through in detail on callouts, tabs, etc. Adjust the table of contents settings. Have a look at the Quarto documentation. See what happens if you do try and output it as a PDF. So, Dan, any questions other than Quarto issues that are worth that we'd like to have and like me to address before I send people off for a break?
Good question. And so I'm just scrolling through because I was so busy building my little Quarto book. I think I don't think anything's massively jumping out. I know. So Tanya's got a little bit of an issue with the environment not always defaulting. So perhaps if she can have a chat to you about that. Hannah's just come in with a question about Overleaf and any thoughts on Overleaf versus Quarto.
So I'm not that familiar with Overleaf. My gut feeling is I don't know if Overleaf does. I don't know if Overleaf does code. That would be my question. I don't know if it does. Possibly not in quite the same way. I will have a look though, because I'm interested. I have heard good things about Overleaf, but it may be that when you start adding in the code elements, that Quarto comes into its own. That would be my gut feeling.
There's some good tips that have been shared as well. One of my favourites is that you can use, if you're in VS Code, use Control Shift and I. That inserts a code block. That's really easy. So that's a good one.
Fantastic. I'm learning too. That's a very nice little shortcut. That'll speed up the demonstrations later, I'm sure. So Control Shift I, lovely. And it even seems to be defaulting to Python, which I'm very happy about. I don't know if that's just because we've already done some Python cells in this document or not, but that is very nice. Thank you, whoever shared that.
I don't think there's anything else, although you might want to have a quick scroll through. I've probably missed some bits. Stuart asked, can you comment code in the YAML section? So, you can like quickly turn on and off echo false. Can you comment that out?
I believe you can.
Oh, okay.
I will just try that out. Let's try getting rid of code folding. So I've commented out my code folding, just waiting for that to start up. And drumroll please. I seem to not have any code. There we go. Yeah, so I would say that yes, you can comment out things in the headers. Just use your normal, normal format of a hash. You can also do the control and / shortcut to comment out the whole line at once or multiple lines if you so wished. And then, yeah, that will work and allow you to quickly change back and forth between settings there. So fantastic. I think that's everything then. I'm going to say, let's say break till, yeah, let's break till 10:50 at least. And then we'll work on this exercise for 40 minutes. So we'll be back at 11:30. So fantastic. Go and enjoy some Quarto. And I will be in the, I will start off in the breakout room called Sammy's Quarto Troubleshooting Clinic for those of you who've just got a few little issues with Quarto running, and I will see if I can solve them. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Hi everyone, sorry that we came back a little bit late. We just wanted to make sure that we got through all of the different questions in the different rooms. Good to see people kind of trying things out, asking questions. I'm sorry that Quarto is being so slow for a lot of you. My theory is that it's something to do with the memory it uses, and it's not a big fan of working at the same time as a Zoom call. I don't have much more to add than that. Usually Quarto is relatively snappy, I find, on most machines. So we'll hopefully, when you're trying this again off your Zoom call, you might find it behaves a little bit better. The other thing is, if you're not closing down the preview between each individual instance of, like, if you can click that preview button again without having to close down the Quarto preview. And that will generally be a little bit quicker to spin back up the new preview rather than closing it down and everything seeming to have to come back to life. So let's carry on with the next section. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk through some different layouts that you might find useful for your projects. I'm also going to talk a little bit about automating reports using parameters and some scripts to run Quarto reports automatically. However, we won't get onto the exercise until after lunch. When we do come back and go on to that exercise, you're very welcome to carry on with exercise 1 if you so wish. If you feel like you've reached the limit of what's useful and you've kind of got the gist of what you want to do with that exercise, do move on to the new exercise. But also, if you're still just getting to grips with Quarto and you want to spend a little bit longer just translating that existing script over, please feel free to do that. That will be plenty useful for 90% of what you want. The things that we're talking about in this next section are really just to kind of give you some ideas for different ways you can use Quarto and different ways to use it for automation or further automation than having to just run the report using the preview button. So what I'm going to do is just to demonstrate as well, for those of you who are using code spaces, I accidentally shut my code space down, but the good thing is I can go back to the repository and I can click on the code button. Now, this is where we usually download our repository from, but if you click on this little code spaces tab, then you get your code space. It recognizes that this was a code space that you have previously opened. It will have saved any changes you've made to files in there, etc. I'm going to click on that. It's going to load again. It'll take a little while. You can see it's just spinning everything back up. It's connecting to my code space, and we will hopefully shortly have a nice working code space to work in. So also going to, if it will behave itself, demonstrate a really nice feature that I wasn't aware of, that someone in one of the groups made me aware of. I think this was Peter in Zilog. And there is a nice interactive editor for Quarto as part of the extension. Now, when this loads itself up, Peter, I don't know if you could shout out, if you could remind me I think there was a shortcut you used to bring that up.
Yeah, it was just next to the 3 dots next to the preview, more actions, and then it's edit in visual mode, Control Shift F4.
Control Shift F4. Oh, that could be anything. Oh, that's Alt F4. Anything that's going to close down what I'm doing in the middle of this, but no. So 3 dots over here and edit in visual mode. Yes, fantastic. Control Shift and F4. So if I click on this now, it will just switch over to the visual editor, or it might not. It's thinking about it. Right, well, this isn't behaving itself for me right now in code. Not sure if it's something to do with code spaces, not sure if it's something to do with the fact I've just loaded the code space back up. Ah, there we go. visual editing mode for Quarto. So it will give you a bit of a warning just to say that it may do a little bit of reformatting behind the scenes to your Quarto code, but let's just have a look at what it looks like. So I've chosen to use the visual mode. And when this loads in, you will probably be faced with something that looks a little bit more familiar, like a sort of standard web-based interface for your documents. So it's just loading up here. And I must say my computer is now also really struggling a little bit. So, but yeah, what you've got here, this looks a lot more familiar. These are our top level headers. We've got our bold text, we've got our italic text. And what you've got up here is what feels a lot more like your standard italic and bold, etc. formatting. And you can use insert code block, insert table, so on and so forth. I think it's still really useful to be aware of what is going on behind the scenes, so you can read and write Quarto documents. Even with the interactive editor I used to use, when I used to use R and R Studio, they have this interactive mode in there as well. I preferred to use the markdown formatting because I find it's really quick and really easy to use. But absolutely, if you would prefer to use this, it feels a little bit more like a Jupyter notebook maybe as well. You are absolutely welcome to do that, and then you can continue to preview your changes as usual. Obviously, what you'll find is this actual code doesn't run as part of this. So whilst it looks a little bit more like what the output will eventually come out as, it's not a true full live preview. It doesn't show you certain elements, but just try that out, see if you prefer it. If it feels a little bit more familiar, please do feel free to use that. I'm going to switch back to source mode. So I've just used the 3 dots there, edit in source mode instead, and that will just take me back to my standard Quarto formatting. So it's still like this behind the scenes, still stored basically identically. It's just how it displays in VS Code for you. So next thing I'm going to do is quickly demonstrate to you what we call dashboard mode. I'm going to create a new Quarto document, and I'm going to add a title. We're still going to work with the Penguins data set here. I'm going to switch my format from HTML to dashboard. Let's save that as my dashboard and click OK. Now, the main thing to note about dashboards is it is just a different way of laying out your interactive content. What it will try to do is fit everything you put onto this Quarto document into a single page. So rather than scrolling down, it will try and resize it all to all fit on one screen. Now we can add additional pages, etc. when we get a little bit further through this, so it can still work for you if you've got quite a lot of content you want to display. But fundamentally, anything we put in here will all try to resize itself down to the screen size. What we do within this is we use our second level headers to try and display the code, to delineate different rows. Now, I'm going to just call this row 1 for now, just to make it clear what's going on. And I'm going to put in some random text. And I'm going to do row 2. This time, I'm going to do a code cell, do Python. I'm going to PD again. Actually, I'm just going to copy in, just for the sake of speed, one of my plots from earlier. So I'm going to need Plotly Express as well. I'm going to need to actually read in Penguins data frame. And now I'm just going to preview this. And I think it's easy to kind of go dashboards. I don't need dashboards. I don't create dashboards in my work, but actually this can still just be a really nice way to display any and all content that you might want to. It's still a really good way to display the outputs of something like a discrete event simulation. So what we have here is now working in the display window for some reason. I don't really know why that is behaving itself now, but what you can see is we actually get these cells, as we would call them, these sort of chunks, these rows. What we have here is some random text, and we have our plot below it. And all of this is going to try and resize itself. No matter how big or small I make this window, it's going to still fit. Now, there's obviously limits to how well that can work, but this can be a really nice way to start displaying more advanced content. Now I could also, let's move that up to my first row. I'm just highlighting the whole lot, Control X to cut. I'm going to now use my iTables to display this as well. So I need from iTables, import show, and do show penguins EF. Preview this now. And you can see it's going to intelligently try again and fit all of this on a single page for me. So it's just loading that up, I believe. And there we go. Again, we've got now half the screen taken up with this rather nice table, this interactive feeling table with search, and that's so on, and our interactive plot at the top. Now, I think you could be fooled into thinking that this is far more interactive than it actually is. Remember, we're still in that situation where if we embed the resources, this is one single HTML file, email it out, pop it on a shared drive, whatever, it will just work for whoever wants to view it. Now, we can also change this to columns. Now, by default, when you start up a dashboard, what it will do is turn everything into rows. Each one of these multi-level headers is a row. Oops. We can change this into orientation columns. Now, hopefully I remembered the command there correctly. And what we'll see instead now is, drum roll, 2 side-by-side columns showing our table and our plot. Simple as that. Now, what happens if I want to start putting extra bits of information? What happens if I want 2 plots over here instead? Well, I'm just going to create an additional scatter plot. Let's scatter plot 2 extra things. Notice here, I haven't put an additional second level header. I've just started a new code cell. And I'm going to do px.scatter again, do penguins data frame. I do X as body mass in grams, Y as the bill depth in milliliters. I'm going to preview this. And what we will see now is within our column on the left. So actually, I'll just change this to make it a little bit clearer. We're now in columns because we oriented it by column. And now we have these 2 plots fitting nicely within our one column and this data frame taking up the column by itself. So that is just the difference between making an extra header, which splits it into another column, and clicking on, and just using an extra code cell, which makes an extra section within our existing column. This takes a little bit of time to get your head around whether you want it to default in columns, whether you want it to default in rows. But the key thing I'm just trying to get across is this gives you multiple ways to create quite complex layouts over time. Now, if I wanted to turn this into, just check where I am in my slides. We can also adjust how much each section of this takes up. So let's say I want to give a little bit more space to my table. It's getting cut off here. I can just do width equals 75%. So we're back to our curly braces and we're just putting that next to our column header. And recognize that these column names, in this case, they're not really doing anything. They're more for our own benefit to keep track of what's going on. They don't actually get displayed in the resulting output. So when this loads, I'm just going to bring up the chat window, make sure I'm not missing anything.
Sorry, Sammy, I don't wish to be, I cannot get columns working, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. But it might just be me. So please don't derail if it is.
Okay. No problem. I will see, maybe chat after this and see if I can work out, because it may be something that is affecting other people. I will see what's going on. Columns may be, it may just be the wording of this, or it could be something more. It could be something to do with the version of Quarto or something like that. So we'll have a look. But what you can see here now is it's taken up, we've split it. So this is taking up 75% of the space. This is taking up 25% of the space. What do we want to go on to next? So you can also do various useful things within this. You can set it so actually your layout will it will actually scroll instead, which kind of takes us back to a report, but you know, still useful to know that this can happen. So we can make it so we've got a bit more flexibility in the exact layout of our dashboard. I won't go through tabs here right now because I don't want to overload you too much more than we already have. But I think it's worth noting that, again, if you want tabs so that you can start clicking through different parts of the, actually, no, let's go through tabs, sorry. Right, I'm going to turn scrolling off. And because it's quite nice here, in our first column, I'll re-preview this. So we're back, we've got rid of the scrolling equals true. We're back to this being 25% plots, 75% data. Within a single column, we can just add in dot tab set. And now I'm going to do a third level header, plot 1, plot 2. And hopefully this will just give you a sense again of how powerful this dashboard layout can be with very little additional code. So we've just told it our column needs to be a tab set, and then everything that is a third level header within this will be its own tab. Now, what will this mean when we actually click in? There we go. We've got, oh, now this is worth noting as well, it will force you to view this in a separate window. You can't interact with the tabs in the inbuilt preview, but what we've got now is plot 1 and plot 2, and you can move between them and use this in any and all tabs, columns that you wish. You can have a single column that makes up your whole data set that has tabs within it. And again, this can just be a really useful way of building in a huge amount of additional information into your plot. Next thing we're going to show you is pages. So actually, if I were to do page 1 up here, and this is a second page of charts, I'm just going to put some text here, and I'm going to preview. So first level headers in a dashboard layout make pages. Second level headers make rows or columns, depending on how you've set it up. Third level headers make tabs. So what you can see now is at the top right here, we have page 1 and a second page of charts. Again, it's just displaying this, unfortunately, not in the, can't display it in the interactive preview. Page 1, our first level header. Page 2, another first level header. Column, second level headers, tabs, third level headers. Just takes a little while to get your head around, but you will find that that is a really nice way to start building up these displays of data. Now, let's head back to my original report. My first report, this is just the one that is displaying different things about penguins. And what I want to show you is some stuff about how to use parameters. So I've closed down my dashboard there. Let's get rid of all that. Now, if we're doing our coding well, let's say I want to create a report now that has a different report per penguin species. I want one report for Gen 2, one report for chinstrap, one report for Adelie penguins. Now, I could go through and every time I want to filter or use a parameter to filter down to the right species, I just type in a string. So let's say I'm actually going to go filtered data frame is penguins data frame, and I only want the rows of the penguins data frame where the species is Adelie. And I'll just use my filtered data frame everywhere now. Now, that, I'm just copying this into all the places it needs to be. And if I now print this, what we'll see as well is we'll all have everything in one color because we've now only got one species being used in our report. Now, this is all well and good, But every time now I want to go through and do something new with this, I need to go through and find every single spot where I have typed in the species name. And I might have done that in more than one place, depending on the kind of report I'm doing. So step one, let's not do that. Let's make ourselves a nice code cell where we just code a variable for species. And I'm going to do Adeline. And let's imagine now I have put this in a few different places across my entire report, but at least now all I have to do is just change the species up here once. Much simpler. If you're used to using SQL, etc., you might find that you already do this sort of thing, and if you're confident with R and Python. But just worth reiterating, if you're going to reuse something in your code, you either want to turn it into a variable or turn it into a function. In this case, we're just interested in turning it into a variable. So now we've got species Adeline, and if I were to change this to chinstrap, what we will get is everything about the chinstrap penguin, and this proliferates through to our entire output. But this still means every time I want to produce these 3 separate reports, I have to come in and I have to change this, and then I have to preview it 3 times. And actually, I probably need to go away and make sure that I'm renaming it as I go through so it isn't overwriting, and there's still potential for error to creep in here. So we're going to do a couple of different things. We're going to turn our parameter into a true Quarto parameter, which is a slightly different thing. We just need to tell Quarto that this is something that we might want to change when we render our document. And we're also going to generate our report using the command line instead of using our preview button. Then we can take it even further, and we can write a script that opens the command line for us and iterates through all of the possible values that we want to include and spits out all the reports for us. And we can take that even further if we want, tell Windows to automatically run that script for us, so on and so forth. You can remove additional layers of manual effort via this route. So first thing, let's turn this into a Quarto parameter. You don't have to do much to do this. Basically, we go back to, remember how we added things like echo or the labels, same thing again. We just tell it that this cell contains parameters. Simple as, done. Now, if I run this report again, functionally nothing changes. This is true if you're using Python. It's a little bit different if you're using R, but for our purposes, we don't need to do anything different. It still recognizes this species variable as something that we can use throughout our report, but it also means now we can access that parameter from the command line. Now, in this case, I'm going to open up a new terminal using this little plus button, or I can do File, Terminal, New Terminal. I just want a nice, clean terminal. I've created my report in the base, in the root folder of this, and so I don't need to move anywhere. But we've done a little bit of moving practice when we were working on Streamlit last week. If you have put it in exercises, or let's say you've put it in code examples or code along, let's do CD code along. You can see our file path has changed here. We're now in the code along folder. But I don't want to be in there because that's not where my report is. Just going to close that terminal, open up a nice new one that is just in my main Quarto and Reproducible Reporting folder. And now I'm going to render my report. Now, rendering functionally for these purposes is basically the same as previewing. What it does is it creates this HTML output, or whatever output we've defined. If we've said we want a PDF, if we've said we want a Word document or a slide deck, render just makes that final document without showing us the preview while we're there. So I'm just going to close that preview just to give you the full experience. Make this a little bit bigger. We need to run the Quarto render command. Now, this might not work if your Quarto hasn't been set up entirely properly by your IT department, if Quarto hasn't understood how it, if your computer doesn't understand what Quarto is, basically. It should have been automatically set up during the install process so that actually when you type in Quarto in the command line, it goes, oh yes, I know what a Quarto command is. That may not have happened, in which case you will get an error. It will work on code spaces, however. And you may just need to go back to your IT department, and I can give some ideas for the kind of thing you will need to say to them to get them to sort this problem. So let's do Quarto, render. We then pass in our report name. So my first report.qmd. Just to demonstrate first, I'm going to delete, try and delete. There we go, delete permanently. You can see now we've no longer got my first report.html in this file. It's not there in this folder. It's not there anymore. If I just run Quarto render, my first report, we get all of these little gubbins that we tend to get when we Quarto preview. It runs a couple of things. It tells us that it's running the code cells, etc. And at the end, our first report has been spat out. It will use the default parameter value we have set. We've set species to chinstrap by default. And we could go through and, still change this, still run it here. Doesn't really make sense to. So what we're going to do instead is tell it what we want the output name to be for our file, and tell it what we want the parameter to be. So I'm going to click the up key on my keyboard. You can see that's just given me back the last command that I ran. This will work for anything in your terminal. Really useful. And then I can use the arrow keys to move around in my command. Now, what I need to add are two things. I need to tell it what I want to save it as, the output file, and I need to tell it the parameter. So I'm going to run 2 hyphens, output. I'm going to give it a file name, easily.html. I need to put that in quotes. And then I'm going to pass in my parameter, easily. If I now press enter again, you can see we now have an additional HTML file called easily. If I were to open this, I don't think my preview is working, unfortunately, for HTML. I did try to get this working. But what we would see here is that all of the values in here relate to our easily penguins. It is effectively just the same as us going in, typing that, and clicking save. It's done the same thing. Great thing now. Okay, we can go press up again. Let's change that to chinstrap. And do this as well, chinstrap.html. We have another report that has spat out using that parameter. So remember, we just need to make sure that Quarto recognizes this is a parameter, and then we need to pass in the parameter value. Now, this all works well. That you can also have multiple parameters. I won't demonstrate this now, but there is a bit of explanation in the slides about how you would pass it in when you've got multiple parameters on the go at once. So it might be that you want to be able to change the start and end date for a report, or you want to change the des parameters, for example. Maybe you want to allow it so people can pass in different values for the number of runs, the number of beds, etc. in this way. This is still a little bit inefficient when we get to larger number of reports, but we can take the power of the command line and harness it for our own use. Now, Quarto themselves provide a function to do this. However, it doesn't allow you to actually pass in parameters. So what I've provided you with is a script that you could reuse and adapt yourself for any of your own needs. So in the code along file here, in code examples, Quarto, parameterized document auto run. I will get rid of these example files for a second, and we'll have a look at what is in this folder. That doesn't seem to want to delete for me at the moment, but hopefully that will go away in a minute. What I've provided you with is this Quarto render function. You don't need to worry about what's in here. You want to actually import and use this function. The actual code behind the function isn't relevant. You just need to you need to run that command in your own script. Now, while I'm waiting for this to load, I'm just going to quickly address a question that's coming through in the comments. So we've had a question from Andrew. For RAP, is it more effective to link to a SQL data source or equivalent rather than a CSV? And how would you do that? So yeah, absolutely. You can definitely link to a SQL data source. And this is definitely something I would recommend. It's a little bit more tricky potentially to get set up if you were to fully automate this on a server or something like that. But for running on your own machines, absolutely something you can do. Your credentials will probably already be stored in some way on your machine. That means you don't have to necessarily enter your username and password. It might be able to access that. I can provide some links, and I do talk about this a little bit at the end of the day today. Some links to packages and details of how you would build this into your code. Unfortunately, we don't have a SQL database that we can give you as an example to practice on, so we haven't really covered that in the course, but it's definitely something you can do, definitely something we could recommend, and it may be something that would be really nice for people to share if you have done this kind of automation in your organizations. Using Python. I know there's a few of you out there, I've spoken to you before. Please do share your experiences in the Slack channel. It would be really useful to people, I think, to hear how you've gone about it in an organization at scale. So the next thing, so what we've got here from our Quarto render function, so that file that you can just copy and use wherever you need it, we're going to import render Quarto. We're going to import pandas. And we're also going to run a line that says, no matter where you're running this from, please move into the folder, into the folder where this file exists. So you can, for every single script that you wanted to run this in, just copy this section and reuse it. That just gets everything set up as it needs to be, gets you into the right place in your terminal, and so on and so forth. What I've done here is I've also imported my penguins data frame, and I've pulled out a list of the unique species. I could just pass in a list of the 3 species names, but for robustness and future-proofing, it's a lot better to try and read from your data source where you want to, say, create reports for 10 different teams or different geographic areas. It's better to read that in and then generate on the fly a list of what current teams exist. So that is what these 2 lines are doing. I've got a print statement here that just prints in my terminal, big message saying, generating report for Adderley, generating report for Chinstrap, generating report for Gen2, just because it makes it a lot easier to actually see what it's working on right now. And then we get to our render Quarto function. All you need to pass into this is what report are you trying to use. I'd recommend that the report is in the same folder as this script. What do you want to call the output file? Now, effectively, I'm going to get rid of those bits. All we're saying here is spit that species name into the output file name. So it will come out as Adderley dashboard, Adderley Gen2 dashboard, and so on. To our parameters, we pass in the species name. Again, remember, we're looping through the 3 species names of penguins here. And then we just print out some extra information just to make sure that we are that we understand what's going on. I'm going to change this for both to false just because it means you don't see quite so much. You can just, again, copy and paste this use of the function, and it will work with any Quarto document. It's all the same. You just need to mildly modify this script for your own purposes. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to run Python file. I'm not going to run it in an interactive window in this case. I'm going to run it just in a Python file, and it will run it in a terminal for me. It will open up a terminal. Now, what this does is it prints out, as I say, this big thing here saying generating report for this species. It tells us what the final command it's passing to Quarto is, and then it generates the report. So it's output this, and then it moves on to the next one, generating report for Gen2. And finally, generating report for Chinstrap. And if I open up my files here, what we will see is we've got Adderley dashboard, Chinstrap dashboard, and Gen2 dashboard. These have all been created by our script. So I'm going to quickly demonstrate to you before we go off for lunch how to publish a Quarto document to GitHub pages. This is a really nice way to round off any of your projects. What you will find is really nice. This is really nice for being able to display some really good documentation or display some results in a way that other people can access. Just going to quickly check that there's nothing else I wanted to talk to you about before lunch. Yeah, so let's have a go at that. Before I move on, were there any further questions about this reporting step, this automation step? Don't think I'm seeing anything. Yep, so we've got a really nice comment there that F strings, just are really useful for this output file. And I couldn't agree more. This file name, you can use it to pass in the day that the report was generated, as James has said. You can use it to, just generate. We could pass in for a DES output, for example. We could generate 20 different combinations, and we could put into the file name what the combinations are, and so on. So I'm going to move over to my standard VS Code for a second, just because this will be a little bit easier for the purposes of demonstrating this final section. So I'm going to create a new window. So I've opened up a brand new clean VS Code window, file, new window, anything like that. I'm going to open a folder, and I'm going to make this a new folder for now. So let's call this publish Quarto report. I'm going to select that folder. Trust the authors. Remember, this is just getting us into a folder, a nice clean folder, like you would do for any project. The reason I'm doing this here is because I want to create a new GitHub repository from it that will allow me to publish my document. I am going to go into my code examples, Quarto, and I'm going to go to, which one do I want? Let's go to dashboard, full penguin dashboard. You can choose any of these basically, but what I'm going to do for now is the full penguin dashboard. And I'm just going to copy that lot across into my nice new folder. So it's all there by itself. I am going to rename this to index.qmd. I'm going to rename the output to index.html. Why does this matter? When we publish it to GitHub pages, it is going to look for a file called index.html, and that is what it will consider to publish onto our GitHub page. That's the only file name that it will recognize at this point in time. Now, that's it. I have an HTML file ready to go. I'm going to go to source control, publish to GitHub. I'm going to publish to a public repository, and I'm going to click OK and commit all of those things to my public repository. And it's just uploading. We can see this down the bottom right here. It's successfully published. So let's open this up on GitHub. And you can see all we've got here is my published Quarto report. It's a nice new repository on my own GitHub. I'm going to go into settings and pages. And I'm going to choose branch. I want to deploy from the main branch. It's the only branch we've got. So I'm going to deploy from the main branch. And I want to deploy from the root folder. I don't need to change anything there. I click save. And now what it is trying to do is build the Quarto report into a GitHub page. So I'm just going to give it a moment to do that behind the scenes. I'm going to refresh. It looks like it's still working at the moment. Let's give it another few seconds, refresh again. Okay, it's not behaving itself today, so let's go back to my published Quarto report. Yeah, so you can see it's currently building our Quarto report into a web page for us. This little orange sign just says that it's kind of doing something. If I keep refreshing, eventually that should change to green. It's just doing some checks and being a little bit slow about it. So what we can do while we're waiting is go into our About. And this brings up our repository details. We could add in some details about our what are we doing here. It's just a demo. We can click on a tick here to use your GitHub Pages website. If I click Save now, what I will get is a link here to my published document. And I'm just going to click in, and this will load it up. And all being well, what we will get is our Quarto document that we've just been working on, available for anyone to see from our GitHub repository. So here we have a more advanced version of the Penguins dashboard with a couple of pages. We click in to explore the data set. We can see that everything here is working. We can click into here and get some additional insights into penguin morphology. We've got different examples here of use of nested tabs and so on and so forth. That's all in Quarto. That's all on GitHub within just a couple of clicks. Now, why do I find this useful? It's so handy for adding in just a little bit of a more pleasant README to go along with any code that you have created. It's also a really nice way if you do have a, for example, a sample model or a bit of code that you can't share outside of your organization the actual results from, you could still use this to demonstrate to an end user, what does that report look like? What does this code generate? What actually happens by using a summary, a sample data set or something like that. But the biggest barrier for most people to actually using and interacting with your code is that process of having to go in and, okay, I've got to fork this and I've got to download it and I've got to run it. If you provide them with a way to understand a nice visual indicator of what on earth this is doing, if you allow them to interact with something, they are a lot more likely to stick around and actually try and contribute. And you can use this for absolutely anything, like I say, documentation to go with your projects. You can also use it. This is the same process that powers all of the books from the HSMA course that you've interacted with over the last couple of months. It's the same thing. It's all Quarto. It's all just publishing it to GitHub Pages and pointing it at the right file. So you'll be pleased to know that we're done for now. I'm gonna send you after lunch to have a bit of a go at parameterized reports and generating those reports through the automated process. But go for now. We'll have, I'll give you 3 minutes extra for lunch. Aren't you pleased? 3 minutes extra for lunch, come back, work on that exercise for a little bit, and then we will move on to a different kind of automation with xlsxwriter. So I'll have you back at past. We'll just quickly recap, or we'll just quickly go through what the exercise will involve, and we'll go from there. So please go and enjoy your lunch. I can't see any other questions at the moment. Do shout out if you have any, or put them in the chat over lunch and I'll get back to you, and I'll see you at 1:30. Hi everyone, welcome back after lunch. I'm just going to quickly give you an overview of what the exercise for this section will be, and then I will send you off to your breakout rooms. So let me just find the relevant section and then I will share my screen again. Don't worry, it hasn't just disappeared for good. Right, where are we here? Too many buttons, too many things to share. So the key thing to note for this exercise now is the first part involves doing some automation. So that script that I demonstrated just before lunch that was talking about taking a Quarto report, adding some parameters to it, or changing some existing variables into parameters and running that so that you can generate multiple reports all in one go. That's what you're going to be mainly focusing on in this section. So it's taking the sample report that is provided in the exercise 2 folder, switching the report to using Quarto parameters, and then using the sample, so generated, there's a file in there called generatereports.py. This imports the code that I demonstrated before. And so you can start to use that to build up your automation script. This should also work on code spaces, not just on Windows, but there may be a couple of differences with Mac that I haven't been able to test. So do let me know if you run into issues with that. Second part of the exercise, if you would like to, is to try and create a GitHub repository as I demonstrated, and try uploading one of the exercises, potentially your DES report from the previous exercise, or one of the code examples, and just get the hang of, just practice your GitHub again, practice getting a repository onto your GitHub, and practice turning that into the page that is accessible from the link. If you do all that, and I will be very, very impressed if you do, this really is, again, just a chance for you to just keep getting comfortable with Quarto, try out a little bit of the automation. That's the main goal. But you could try turning the mental health report from a report layout to a dashboard layout, which we demonstrated as well. You could do that instead of the GitHub section if that's something your group would prefer to do. Finally, just if you did it, you had a few issues with getting Quarto to work full stop at the beginning, you'd actually prefer to spend a bit more time on the DES exercise that we started this morning, please do just carry on with that. That's absolutely fine. The main goal of today is just to get you comfortable working with Quarto to some extent. So I will leave you with those options. I'll post these instructions in the class tannoy as well, and I will open up breakout rooms. We'll work on this for roughly 40 minutes, and I will see you after that. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope that you got on okay with that exercise. And I can also let you know that that is your last official code-based HSMA phase 1 exercise. So end of an era. Didn't want to tell you beforehand, would have been too sad. So, but I hope you have enjoyed working in your peer support groups, and we will be encouraging you to keep using your peer support groups throughout the rest of the phases, so throughout phase 2. So I am going to go through a few more bits. We will cover a little bit more now about some other ways you can use Quarto, and we will also talk through how you can create your own nice fancy Excel files for general use with what's output as outputs of your Python code, and why you might want to do that. So with all that said, let's kick off and just talk a little bit about Quarto, and just you can sit back and relax in the knowledge that I won't be asking you to actually do an exercise on this. However, there is an exercise provided for the Excel part, which you are very welcome to take part in at your own leisure. I will be sharing the solutions to that and the exercises from earlier today after that. The only thing I will say is, there is coming up in the chat, I will be awarding peer support group points for anyone who can tell me some of the names of those, where did those names come from in the community mental health teams. In particular, Timberhearth, I'm interested to see if anyone knows that one. And if you don't, I will tell you in a minute what game that is, and it is one of the best games of all time, in my opinion. So Quarto, why else do I think Quarto is so good, and why have I bothered to tell you so much about it today? I think Quarto can be a fantastic tool for your day-to-day coding. I don't think it matters if you don't think that an HTML output is what you want to send on to your stakeholders or something like that. For me, Quarto can be a really nice way to do your general coding, to change your pipelines in, rather than just having a .py file or something like that. Because even if the final output is something just like a simple CSV file or writing something back to a database, by using Quarto throughout the process to actually put in, do some outputs, show what the table looks like at interim steps, add in some checks to make sure that things aren't changing unexpectedly, add in some graphs that you can sort of visually inspect. Code-based checks are good, but sometimes you really just want to be able to look at what's going on in your script and verify that it's okay, even if that's not your final output. And Quarto can really help with that, and it can also give you a chance, rather than having to write reams and reams of code comments, to give some more structure to a more elongated analysis process. Add some headings, add some explanation of the context behind why something is done like it is. Code is great for that, but Quarto can also just be a really nice way to do that. And because Quarto, unlike a Python notebook, doesn't have any sort of additional gubbins around it, it doesn't have metadata, etc. What you see in a Quarto document, in a Quarto markdown file, is what you get. So it works really well for version control. So on to what else I want to tell you about Quarto. General documentation as well. I think Quarto books can be fantastic for that. Do you have reams of processes stored in different Word documents across your department? Or do you actually want to document something that is a bit more in-depth, perhaps a project like an HSMA project? Do you want a way of interleaving lovely bits of text and code and images, like a process map, that sort of thing, in a way that really helps other people to understand what your work was, and also helps you to come back and go, what on earth was I doing? I think Quarto books can be really, really good for that. Now, why does a Quarto book differ from a single Quarto document? It's a collection of linked pages with Quarto handling all of the navigation. It will include each separate document within the book is its own Quarto document. This can include tables of contents, all your embedded code, your images, etc. And you can split those further into sections, which can be just documents or just a header. So a couple of examples of Quarto books, the NHSR community, if you're part of that, you may have seen their statement on using tools. This is a really nice example of a simple Quarto book, not too much going on in there, but how it can be used really nicely for documenting policies, etc., in a way that's quite open and shareable and version controlled. All of the HSMA course books are Quarto books, and these even include the ability to have interactive running code within your book. The Samuel books are a really nice example of how you might use Quarto or something similar to actually document your code work and your kind of interim documents on the way to your final output. Now, this actually uses something called Jupyter books. It's very similar. Fundamentally, you can do exactly the same thing with Quarto books, but that's a really nice link to take a look at if you want to see how useful it can be to document the stages of analysis and collate this into a book for other people to access. Now, Quarto books are done in a slightly different way. Previously, we did new file and Quarto document. This time, we just use new file and we'd choose a Quarto project. There are multiple types of project and all of them could have some use to you, but the main one I would recommend that you would start out with is a book. And rather than saving a single file, we actually choose a directory where the entire project will live. What it will do is make a series of starter files for you in that directory. So it comes up with a couple of standard Quarto Markdown documents that it expects in every book. And it also creates this fancy one called quarto.yaml. Quarto.yaml is your key file in your project. It defines project level settings. So you could set something here, for example, like echo equals false or codefold equals true for every document within your entire Quarto project. So you don't have to set that at a header by header level. It also allows you to specify a title, who authored it, when it was published, so on and so forth. The key thing is probably these chapters. Now, the chapters will define what order everything appears in within the books. It also by default sets it up so that it will output as an HTML file, but also as a PDF document. You don't have to have both. You can just nix the PDF one if you just want an ebook, but just be aware that by default, that is what it will set up to do. And you can see that on the left here, what we've got in these sample folders, the default files that it's created reflect the chapters that are created over here: index, intro, references, summary. And I've also put in my extra page. I've created an extra Quarto Markdown file, and I can put that wherever I want. It's also you can set up a more complex layout, including parts. So for example, this is just a quick overview of how one of the geographic books, one of the HSMA books, how those outputs appear in the sidebar for navigating through the book compared to how they appear in the Quarto YAML file. Now you'll notice that these names don't reflect what the file names are. What it reflects is the title of each individual document. Like I say, Quarto is great, but you may find that you've done a lot of your work, or you do a lot of your work going forward in notebook files. And the great thing is Quarto can render notebooks as part of books or as standalone files. You can get the best of both worlds in that way. This example here is just a it's just a Python notebook, a Jupyter notebook that has been rendered using the Quarto engine. It just looks like a Quarto document. Again, this is so useful because just sending people a Jupyter notebook it's not always the best option, but turning it into a rendered HTML or even something like a PDF using Quarto or mixing and matching notebooks and Quarto Markdown files can be a really powerful option. And within those notebooks as well, you can start to add in commands. So it will recognize if you put a code fold command or an echo equals false command into a Jupyter notebook cell, that will be recognized when you use the Quarto render function on it. And there's a little bit more about how you could do that here. Other thing to note there is that Quarto Markdown documents, as I keep saying about gubbins and metadata and everything, Quarto documents are fantastic because they are human readable in any program across any operating system. They are just fundamentally text, and that's why all this Markdown stuff's so good. Every header, it's just text. All the bolding is just text. All your code cells, it's just text. The outputs are saved to a separate file, and it's really easy to exclude that from version control. So it's quite a safe format in that sense. On the other hand, the IPython notebooks, they store lots of additional metadata within the notebooks. There are files and packages available to strip that out, but what it generally means is every time you save a notebook and try to upload it on GitHub, it comes up telling you there's been loads of changes, and it's not easy to look at the diffs and understand what's changed. Quarto doesn't have that problem. And also, if you don't clear all the outputs from your notebook, there is a risk that you will upload those outputs onto GitHub or into version control full stop. That might not always be a problem, but for some more sensitive outputs, that is a lot more difficult, and you have to put more processes in place to make sure that doesn't happen. Whereas Quarto, you can set up, for example, a default template for your GitHub repositories, which would always exclude, say, every HTML file. So you're no longer at risk of uploading things you're not planning to upload. So I really like Quarto for those reasons. Like I say, unlike your single Quarto documents, you will need to use Quarto render. We used this a little bit in the command line earlier to run those documents with the parameters, but this is also something that you'll need to use if you want to generate the entire book output. There's a little bit here about how you'd publish a Quarto book on GitHub pages. I won't go through that now because for some of you it won't be relevant, but just be aware that there's some steps here that you might want to take which will make it easier to get it up on GitHub pages. You can also automate publication with GitHub Actions, so you can actually set it up so GitHub will do the rendering for you. And every time you put in a new .qmd file and update that on your GitHub repository, it does everything behind the scenes to render it and turn it into a final output. That can be really nice because it means you're not tied into all the rendering having to happen on someone's computer. It makes it easier to just quickly change a couple of things, potentially via something like code spaces or just manually editing the files. The people that want to edit it don't necessarily have to have Quarto installed themselves. So I think for me, Quarto is part of a bigger whole. So you start off with environments, you add code, you add version control, you add Quarto, you add GitHub pages, and overall what you're getting is this really reproducible, extensible, auditable work, which is just such a game changer. The amount of time you can save by automating away the drudge work, the stuff that you have to do day in, day out, because it just takes up headspace. It takes up time, takes up headspace, it takes up just stuff that you could be doing, time that you could be doing more advanced projects with, more advanced value added stuff using some of the other skills we've talked about, or just allowing you to do analysis that you couldn't do before. One of the previous HSMA projects automated the process of health equity analysis. That was just something that wasn't done full stop because the actual analysis just took so long. There was not time and capacity within the team to do that. By automating that report, they could run it across tens, hundreds of teams in almost no time, and it's hugely impactful. So I'm going to end, and this feels a really odd thing to end on in a lot of ways. We're talking about Python to Excel. I'm glad to say that there's another section at the end of today where we talk about a load of other fantastic operational research and data science techniques, just to kind of cleanse your palate. But also, I do think that it is so important to understand how to get out of Python and into Excel, because it is inevitably the tool that so many people are familiar with and what people will be comfortable using. Like I say, it is just the reality of the data culture in a lot of the organizations you are probably working in at the moment. Excel itself is not going to help you change that culture, but meeting people where they currently are is really, sorry, I'm just seeing Dan's messages pop through. Meeting people where they are is really going to matter for making sure that people start to understand the value of what you can do with Python. Like I say, change can be really difficult. Small steps are the way that you're going to get people on board with you. Give them a little glimpse of what's possible. Put some really fancy calculations into Excel. Take something that they currently get as an Excel spreadsheet, but someone's sitting there typing in all the details or copying and pasting things in and out of SQL. Turn that into an Excel spreadsheet that they can still use just like they always could, but you've saved a load of your time. You may have started to hear as well about Python in Excel. I would recommend steering away from that because you get back into that same old problem of version control, of things being hidden away in a way that isn't easy to see. It's just like having macros and having VBA, etc. running. It can be really powerful and it can do really great stuff, but it is just so much harder to audit and understand than a code file. Whereas you do it the Excel from Python way round, and we're back to that same benefit that we were just talking about with Quarto. Everything's auditable, everything's shareable, reproducible, etc. It really doesn't matter how good your analysis is if no one is going to use it. And the great thing about Python to Excel is it doesn't matter how complex what you're doing is behind the scenes. So, for example, we've got here Zella King's work. A couple of you I know have been to watch her presentations on the work that she's done at UCLH on bed capacity demand work, and that is using an XGBoost model. It's really quite complex work. It's taken several years. The output, the primary output, is an Excel file. That's taking, there is machine learning going on behind the scenes. The output is Excel. Those two things can coexist. And if that is the way that your stakeholders currently need it to make it work, that's a better starting point than just going, well, I can't do any data science because no one's going to use it, or I can't host something with a Streamlit app, or I can't share Quarto documents for whatever reason because no one will approve Quarto. If you can get it out to Excel, that may be the foot in the door that you need. There's a couple of different libraries available for doing this. I'm going to hate saying this. xlsxwriter is a library for reading and writing from the format. There's some similar libraries in R, and it's not the only package that is available in Python for this. OpenPixel is one you will come across a lot, but I really like xlsxwriter because it has support for a very wide range of Excel features. You can create formatted text, merge cells, you can define ranges, you can do charts, you can do filters, conditional formatting, text boxes, all the things that you generally want to get in your standard Excel files. And I've provided a series of progressive code examples for common scenarios in the code examples Excel from Python folder, but the documentation is generally really good as well. A huge amount of different examples in there. So setting up a spreadsheet, I'm going to take you through how you would do some of the key commands of xlsxwriter, and then I will show you how you'd more likely use this in practice, taking a pandas data frame, whether you've pulled that in from a database yourself and done some additional calculations with it, or whether you have whether you've got CSVs, etc., outputs from models, whatever you want to do. There's a couple of different ways you might go about doing this. But to start with, the main thing you will do is import xlsxwriter, the library. This is available in the reproducible reporting environment. You create a new workbook, new Excel workbook. You pass it in the name of that you want it to save with. You add a worksheet to it. You can specify the name. If you don't specify the name, it will just be sheet 1. And then you can start to write in text. So you could write in text, you could write in numbers. We just use the worksheet.write function, method even, and we pass in a cell reference and we pass in whatever we want to write, whether that's something we've calculated using Python or whether it's just something that we've chosen to write here. And then we close down the workbook. That's the final step all the time, is you close down the workbook when you're finished working with it. Now you can start to format these values as well. You might want to add bold to make it a little bit clearer when it's a header, that sort of thing. or you might want to format things as number, currency, percentages, and so on. You can do that quite easily. What you use is the add format method. Now, some of these look a little bit opaque. How would I know that bold true is the right way to do it, or num format, etc. is the right way to do it? This is just coming from the documentation, but the main ones to know about are bolding. That's probably the one you'll use the most. And you can look at documentation for different ways to format numbers, currency, etc. But this may look familiar to you if you've ever gone into Excel and tried to format a more complex number in it. What we then do is every time we write something into a cell, we just also pass the format to it. So here we've now got 3 cells. We've got A1, B1, and C1, and we've passed in bold. Now, instead of using cell references in write, we can pass in rows and columns as numeric values. So here, instead of doing A1, I've done it's HSMA t-shirts here. So sorry, instead of A2, I've done 1, 0. It's row 1, column 0. So remember, Python starting from 0 for its indexing. A1 would be 0, 0. A2 would be 1, 0, and so on and so forth. Now, this can get really handy, like I say, with bigger spreadsheets where you want to start iteratively adding things. Worth noting as well, when you pass in numbers instead of strings, our Excel spreadsheet will automatically format those as numeric values. We can also pass in our format arguments here too for things like currency or date formats. We can also then start using the right formula method, and we can start to add in cells that respond to the changes within the spreadsheet. And that's one of the big things that I've found when people, if you've just output something as a CSV from a pandas or even as an Excel from a pandas, you do all these fantastic calculations in there behind the scenes, but then someone turns around and goes, the data's wrong, it's out of date, and they want to change what the file is saying, but everything else is then static because it's just a static export from pandas, or so on and so forth. Instead, if we use the right formula method, we can start to build in those formulas that update, and the outputs will update based as people edit the spreadsheet, just like a spreadsheet that they're completely used to. They have no idea that this came from Python. To them, it just looks like any normal output. But instead of you having to go into SQL and copying and pasting things and trying not to overwrite things and adjusting things, the script does it for you. So it is often a lot more work than doing the calculation in Python, but once you've done it once, that's it. Once you've set this spreadsheet up, you don't have to do this again. So what you probably will end up doing more often, it's useful to know all those right commands for various reasons, but you may find yourself wanting to add in data from a data frame instead, a pandas data frame. And you need to do this in a very slightly different way. We first create what we call an xlsxwriter object. This is actually a pandas method, not an xlsxwriter method. So we do writer equals pd_xlsxwriter. The first argument is your file path. The second argument is always engine equals xlsxwriter. We then use the toXL method of our pandas data frame. We tell it what sheet we want to put it in, and we then tell it that we want to put it into the xlsxwriter. Usually that first argument would be the spreadsheet we want to write to, but instead we can start using xlsxwriter to do this instead. Now, for just a single spreadsheet, a single table that we're not editing any further, this doesn't really do much for us. Instead, it's more important when we want to be able to edit this further. Also worth noting here, the toXL argument accepts a huge range of additional parameters you may want to use. So you can skip rows or columns before you paste in the data frame. That can be really useful if you want to start putting multiple data frames on the same sheet, for example. Whether you want to represent missing data as blanks, zeros, 999, whatever, Zs, do try and choose a good value, please. And whether to freeze the panes in the resulting sheet. So if you want to freeze the top column or freeze the first row, you can do that from within the toXL method. Worth noting that Excel tables, you may not be so familiar for this if you have been blissfully unacquainted with Excel, but Excel tables are a really handy thing for enhancing our spreadsheets. We can designate a range as an Excel table. This gives a name to the range of cells, and it also adds the ability to filter and sort the table. In Excel, this would also give you some really nice ways of writing special functions that use the table columns, etc. I haven't got this working. It seems a little bit finicky. I will update if I do ever get that working. But you can start modifying your data frame after adding it in to turn it into a table, an actual Excel table, for example. Now, the next couple of things I'm going to go through like this, I'm going to go through it fairly quickly just so that you're aware of what's possible, but just remember all of those code examples are available to you to adapt and reuse in your own way, whatever is most handy for you. Don't think that you have to memorize all of this right now. Remember, we're not doing an exercise on this in a minute. Just want you to know what's possible. So here we have a data frame, our HSMA store items data frame in this case, detailing our HSMA merchandise stock. I set my Pandas xlsxwriter, I use with Pandas xlsxwriter, and I set this as my format, and I call it as writer. I then indent everything else I'm going to do within this. This is all the stuff that I'm doing where I'm actually accessing this Excel file and writing things and making changes. And every time I refer to writer, that's what I'm referring to, my Pandas xlsxwriter object. So I write in my data frame. I then need to get access to the workbook objects, the workbook and the worksheet, and I can access them like this. Store them as variables called workbook and worksheet. Every time then I want to write additional bits of text, anything like that, into my worksheets, I can do that using the workbook and worksheet objects that I have now extracted. We can then start to go through and work out what extent our table is. How wide is it? How many rows does it encompass? And we can tell the worksheet to add that as a table. So there's a couple of different settings here. Like I said, don't worry too much about what they are, but effectively this is the code that you would need to turn your unformatted table into a nice formatted table like this. Now, the great thing about this is it also gives you interactive filters straight away. You don't have to do anything else to do that. You can choose to have this first column looking different. You can have this first row looking different. You can add banding, etc. You can make the colors follow your organizational rules, etc. You can make it indistinguishable from an existing spreadsheet. There are also ways to add these formulas into tables. I won't go into detail, but do take a look at the sheet, at the slides if you're interested. So add formulas into tables like this. You can also create pivot tables. I kind of would call them pseudo pivot tables. You can't create a true pivot table through this method, and that's one of the big limitations. It's not possible, and it is not on the roadmap for any of the packages for Excel writing that I'm aware of, because it is very, very complicated behind the scenes. But what you can do is use formulas cleverly to create a sort of a pseudo pivot table, something that, say, looks at a category and only sums up the value of it if it falls into a particular category. You can use your Python code cleverly to start iterating through what categories are there in my data set. I'm going to create a row for each category. I'm going to create a formula that looks at each category and sums up if it's relevant, that sort of thing. There's another example of that in the data in the code examples folder. So I'm going to just skip through that. You can also build in true Excel charts. This allows you to, again, respond to the user's input changing. And these aren't too bad to create as well. They're really quite simple. So as you can see, as the user's changing, in this case, the chart is true chart, and it's updating nicely. I know, Dan, those Excel charts are just, but we define the kind of chart we want. We pass in the required information. We set up the name and formatting of the X and Y axis labels. We add a title and we add it to the worksheet. There's not too much going in. The information that you pass is always going to be the same. What are the values in this case? What are the categories? And what would you call that series? It will be a little bit different actually for things like scatter graphs, etc. But again, you can just look up the documentation and it will give you nice, clear examples for how you could apply this to your own data. And Python being Python, sometimes it gives us a really nice, easy way to do things that you'd think would be quite complicated. So you can set all of the automated column widths just using worksheet.autofit, and everything will come out looking perfect. Now, there's always the risk with any sort of automation project that you think you will spend some time automating it, because it always takes up time and you will free up time. There is definitely the possibility that it goes this way instead, and that actually as you debug, keep things working, you just find yourself just stuck in a mire of keeping your automations working rather than actually having them just do your job for you. Over time, your Python will get better. We will talk a little bit later on as well about how you could build in automated testing to avoid these sorts of problems. And you will, after that initial hump, I'm confident that you will be in that situation. It will take time, but the automation in the long run and the value that you also add through just making your code auditable, making it shareable across different organizations. I know across the NHS, everyone is doing the same thing differently. There are so obviously nuance and ways that things, do differ across trust, but there are things that really could be shared. And why are we all doing this individually? Also worth noting, as I mentioned, Quarto is really great at simple PowerPoint presentations, but if you have a slide deck that someone is getting you to generate every month and you have to copy and paste loads of slides in and out and loads of data in and out, Python PPTX, the library there is fantastic. Again, it's designed to be robust, it's designed for industry, it's designed to allow you to create really kind of elaborate PowerPoint documents from code again. So you could be bringing in the output of complex computations. You could be building in more complex, nice matplotlib charts, that sort of thing. You can put in some placeholders so that end users can go ahead and add in their own commentary around things. But it really is just all so vital for freeing up your time, as I say, to do the exciting stuff, to do a DES, to do some natural language processing, and to save the NHS and your other organisations that you come from just from the hell of spending time doing the same thing over and over when there are tools out there to take away some of that burden. So we're not going to do the Excel exercise. You'll be pleased to know we are going to instead move on to a little bit of a phase 1 wrap up.